Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. It's time for another video requested by this month's Quasar Commander, and we've been on a bit of a theme here. Their first request was the Egyptian gods, then we moved on to their, I hesitate to say dark reflections, but their knockoffs, the sacred beasts. And now, we're going to be covering another theme of mythical giants that are huge build-arounds with gigantic payoffs, and bonus, it's also another villain archetype. Introducing Timelords, a series of otherworldly, monolithic beings wielded by the final boss of 5D's, Zone. This temporal tyrant went back in time to save the world by destroying dueling. An absolutely ridiculous concept on the face of it, but when synchro summoning itself is responsible for fueling a rampant perpetual energy field, NRD, that summoned a bunch of bloodthirsty killing machines after having been abused for centuries, well, you can see where they're coming from. It might also take a little extra suspension of disbelief to grapple with the fact that Zone underwent plastic surgery to look like Yusei to rally the population of Earth while in the middle of said crisis. But hey, this is Yu-Gi-Oh! For crying out loud. You can train yourself to draw better by picking cards out of waterfalls. Nothing is impossible in this world. But this isn't Yusei's Imposter Explained, the secret third part of the hit Yusei Explained series, and besides, I've already done my part in saving the world from the threat of Yu-Gi-Oh!, so now we need to focus on the main event. Let's zoom out and look at our timelines, see how our actions splinter reality into infinite causal existences, then see what variables we can adjust to bring about a brighter tomorrow. And hey, if that involves killing every last duelist on the planet, then so be it. It's time for Timelord Explained. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no better way to get there than on our duel runners. Our next stop is 40k, which means Leo and Luna Explained, where we'll be covering Ancient Fairy Dragon's companions, the Power Tool Dragons, Morphtronics, and any other cards that are more than meets the eye. We've also got a Discord, where someone posted this funky little snecky, and it just put a big smile on my face. I also have a Twitch where you can join me for viewer duels, progression polls pulls, and chaos draft pulls for the foreseeable future. And don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with Timelords? Well, they're a series of level 10 fairy-type monsters of various attributes, and they all represent a different Sephiroth in the Tree of Life. A symbol that can be found in the Jewish Kabbalah, with each Sephiroth representing an aspect of God. Though if you're not familiar with the religious text, you might be familiar with it if you've seen Evangelion, or any Zephyr card. They're also all named after an archangel, and have some very particular quirks. They can't be special summoned from the deck, and if you control no monsters, you can normal summon them without tributing. They can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, and you take no battle damage from attacks involving them. They also shuffle themselves into the deck during your standby phase, and at the end of the battle phase, if they battled, they apply a unique effect. So no matter what their stat line is, you're incentivized to attack with them each turn, and your opponent is disincentivized to do the same during their turn, lest they trigger the effect in additional time. This leads to a very slow and methodical playstyle, using your Timelord monster effects to slowly whittle down your opponent's resources while leveraging a number of control cards to drag the game out as long as possible. Almost like it's trying to mimic the cruel, inexorable march of time, ever advancing towards an unforgiving future, stripping away pieces of yourself slowly, so slowly that you'll barely notice. And by the time you do, it'll be too late. Haha! Happy fun children's card game! Haha! But before we get into any of those nerds, let's take a look at a very helpful piece of support. Time Maiden is a level 1 light fairy monster with 0 attack and defense, and if you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. This card can be treated as 2 tributes for a Timelord Monsters tribute summon, and you can tribute this card to add a Timelord monster with 0 attack from your deck to your hand. You can also banish this card from your grave to special summon a Timelord monster with 0 attack from your deck, ignoring summoning conditions. But you cannot special summon other monsters during the turn you activate this effect, which unfortunately conflicts with its own special summoning effect because it doesn't check after it was used, but your entire turn. So normally, you're going to special summon Time Maiden from your hand, and either tribute it for one of your Time Lords to set up Maiden's special summon effect in the grave later on, or just tribute Time Maiden to find a Time Lord you can normal summon. Then, on subsequent turns, you can banish Time Maiden to summon any Time Lord you want. Well, okay, all but 2. Heck, it can even mean you have 2 Time Lords on the field at the same time to multiply their effectiveness. Though the special summon lock means you won't be overlaying for something like Gustav Max during main phase 2. But, despite that, it's hard to argue that this card isn't Maiden of value. Alright, now it's time to cover the Time Lords proper, starting with Gabrion the Time Lord, a water monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, shuffle as many cards your opponent controls as possible into the decks, then they draw cards equal to the number of cards shuffled into their main deck. This technically makes this a board wipe, but your opponent is going to get those cards back by way of drawing. Well, most of them. You get a free pass on any extra deck monster, as well as anything that's summoned that would get banished if it leaves the field, which is pretty swell all things considered. And if your opponent is under the effects of Droll and Lockbird, then they aren't going to get any cards back. It's a little difficult to set up, but you can see why it would draw a lot of attention. Halon the Time Lord is an earth monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled and your life points are lower than your opponent's, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the difference. That's right, you can set your opponent's life points to your own, provided yours are lower. This incentivizes you to pay as many life points as possible to make your opponent suffer the same consequences as you, and the lower you go, the easier it'll be to swipe the win with a decent burn effect, of which we have quite a few. Just make sure you don't pay too many life points without a plan, otherwise it'll really cost ya. Camion the Time Lord is an earth monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battles, you shuffle a card your opponent controls into the deck, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent, and neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. Now, this isn't quite as splashy as other effects, only taking care of a single card, but as far as removal solutions go, this is premium. It doesn't target, it doesn't destroy, it puts the card back in the deck where it'll be the hardest to deploy from, and nothing can respond to it. Oh, and you get a little extra burn damage for your troubles. It's almost like the card never existed, like it just vanished from time. Lazion the Time Lord is a fire monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, shuffle all cards from your opponent's grave into the deck, wiping out any graveyard synergies they might have had. Oh, and a little extra effect here, once per turn if your opponent draws a card, you burn them for 1,000. Normally, you'll only be triggering this effect during your opponent's draw phase, but if they draw during your turn, mayhaps by some maximum cockroach or a deal from the Dark World, you can squeeze in a little extra damage. So Lazion burns out your opponent's grave and their life points. They got really literal with the fire theming on this one, huh? Medion the Time Lord is a fire monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, return as many monsters on the field to the hand, other than this card, and if you do, burn your opponent for 300 damage for each card returned. Honestly, this is one of the more tame effects. True, it bounces a whole board of monsters, but unless they're from the extra deck, they're probably going to be coming right back, and even bouncing 3 only nets you 900 points of damage. Still, it does a whole reset on the monster lineup, including some of your own, so you can get back to normal summoning your Time Lords if you accidentally clogged up your monster zones, and against decks that do end on a massive board of extra deck monsters, it'll put the meta in Medion. Michion the Time Lord is a fire monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, have your opponent's life points. Oh, now that's what I'm talking about! Now, the only life point that matters is the last one, and since this halves, it'll certainly never win you the game on its own, but it really helps bring their total low enough for our definitive burn values to close things out. And hey, resolving this card is half the fun of the deck! Raffion the Time Lord is a wind monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of one monster your opponent controls that battled this card this turn. Pretty much Flame Wingman's effect, except you don't have to destroy what you battled. This is a way of punishing your opponent for summoning big monsters, because if they do, you can cleave through a few thousand of their life points with a single activation. Wait, so the monster that bounced a whole board of monsters is fire. Even though that's traditionally a wind effect, and the wind monster deals massive amount of burn damage all at once, even though that's a fire trait. You know, I'm starting to think Zone doesn't have a respect for how monster cards are designed, which, I guess kinda makes sense. Sadion the Time Lord is a wind monster with 0 attack and defense, And at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled and your life points are less than 4,000, your life points become 4,000. Okay, so while most Time Lords are built to strike at your opponent, Sadeon is here to help keep you in the game, which is especially helpful if you try to go down the Halion route of lowering your own life points to bring down your opponent's. Alternatively, this means you can run 3 copies of Solemn Judgment and know you can jump back up to a life point total that won't immediately die to a few direct attacks out of nowhere. It certainly breathes new life into your strategy. Zaphion the Time Lord is a water monster with 0 attack and defense, and at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, shuffle all spells and traps your opponent controls into the deck. And if this card is sent from the field to the grave, you can draw a card. So it's Harpy's Feather Duster, except you don't have to deal with any pesky grave effects, and if this card gets sent to the grave somehow, you get a free draw to replace it. Heck, if you want, you can even trigger this yourself. Despite its large level, it is a normal summoned monster with 1,000 or less attack, so it is viable link material for Salamangreat Almirage. Now, that would keep a monster on your field, which would be difficult to remove so you could summon your other Time Lords, but the option is there, though it does risk watering down your strategy. Sandion the Time Lord is a light monster with, wow, 4,000 attack and defense. And that's not the only way it flips the script, as neither player takes battle damage from attacks involving Sandion. Not just you. Very, very sad about that. In fact, there are a lot of things different. Its tribute cheating mechanic also changes from if you control no monsters to if only your opponent controls monsters, so it's got a bit of a Cyber Dragon vibe to it, though it of course doesn't special summon. And it's the only one that specifically states you can only control one of, so no doubling up on Sandions. The payoff though is that this is really good at closing out games. At the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, you burn your opponent for 2,000 damage. Yeah, a whole quarter of their life total, just gone. Combo that with Michion's life point halving effect, and you won't need very many Sandion activations to finish things off. And it can even take monsters out by battle and remove threats, unlike most other Time Lords that can do little more than slap a monster without its effects. So this makes for a Time Lord neither you nor your opponent should take lightly. Cephalon, the ultimate Time Lord, is another odd corner case. It's a light monster with 4,000 attack and defense that lacks the usual Time Lord trappings. It can't be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned from the hand by having 10 or more monsters in your grave. And once per turn, you can special summon a level 8 or higher fairy monster from your hand or grave, but its effects are negated. Also, its attack becomes 4,000. Gee whiz, now that's a closer! A free special summon with a loaded grave that can deploy any of your Time Lords as generic 4,000 beatsticks. And while you don't get their bonus effects, they still represent a combined 8,000 attack, and that only gets scarier the longer this is allowed to go on. And the best part, this can be leveraged into a Gustav Max for game, so really, why would you settle for anything less than the ultimate Time Lord in terms of attack and defense? So that covers the 10 Sephiroth and the embodiment of the Sephiroth itself, but we're still not done yet if you'd believe it. Eve from the Arc V manga rears her villainous head again to show off another extension of a spin-off's boss monster deck. Presenting Timelord Progenitor Vorpgate, a level 10 Dark Fairy Synchro monster with 0 attack and defense, requiring generic material. Like other Time Lords, it can't be destroyed by battle or card effect, and you take no battle damage from battles involving this card. However, it does not shuffle into the deck during your standby phase, and it lacks the tribute cheating effect because, well, it's a synchro. Also, its battling effect triggers at the end of the damage step, not at the end of the battle phase, banishing all monsters your opponent controls, but they also take half battle damage for the rest of the turn. And once per turn, during the end phase, if this effect was activated this turn, you special summon as many monsters as possible that were banished from this card's effect to your opponent's side of the field, and this is not optional. So this can temporarily clear a board so that your other monsters can get through, but then they'll all come back later to harass you. Unless you're able to get Vorpgate off the field before then. See, the banishing effect doesn't come with the clause that returns those monsters later on, like Farfa does. Rather, the return summoning is a separate effect that triggers during the end phase, which means you have all of main phase 2 to link Vorpgate away, use it as material for an even bigger synchro, tribute it away, you name it. As long as this copy of Vorpgate isn't around during the end phase, your opponent's monsters will be gone and stay gone. Truly, this card is the pinnacle of the Vorpgating gaslighting girl boss. That's all the Time Lords, but as it turns out, there are a few more support cards to keep them in the game. Or rather, one support card that evolves over time if you want to think about it in a cool way. The process starts with Empty Machine, a continuous trap card, and the first time this face-up card on the field would be destroyed by an opponent's card effect, it is not. And once per turn, you can activate one of these effects. You can discard a level 10 monster to draw a card, or if this card is the only card in your spell and trap zones, you can target a Timelord monster in your grave, shuffle it into your deck, then you can set an infinite machine directly from your hand or deck. This provides you with a bit of a draw engine, trading out extra Time Lords to hopefully find more utility cards. The second mode is a bit more restrictive, making it so you should be playing normal spells and normal traps that you know you can get rid of at a moment's notice, but it doesn't stop the evolution. Rather, it just makes it slower since you can't just pull that card out of your deck. That next evolution being Infinite Machine, another continuous trap card, and it can only be activated by sending a face-up Empty Machine from your spell and trap zone to the grave. It also can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects once per turn, and it also has a modular effect. You can either special summon a Time Lord from your hand, or you can target a Timelord monster in your grave, shuffle it into the deck, then you can set an Infinite Light directly from your hand or grave. So already, we've got a card that can help turbo out Time Lords to help with stacking our effects, and this works a lot longer than Time Maiden without locking you out of your other special summons. And this evolution effect doesn't care if you have other spells and traps or not, which is fantastic. And that leads to the final form, Infinite Light, a continuous trap card that can only be activated by sending a face-up Infinite Machine from your spell and trap zone to the grave. This face-up card can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects at all, so no amount of MSTs are gonna get through to this card. It keeps both players from targeting Timelord monsters with card effects, or returning them from the field to the deck, meaning you don't have to worry about them vanishing. Once Infinite Light is on the board, they're gonna stay on the board. Also, once per turn, if you control no monsters, you can special summon up to one Timelord monster each from your hand, deck, and grave with different names, ignoring summoning conditions. And that can cause an OTK all by itself. Assuming your opponent is at a full 8,000, Michion and Sandion are a given. Stack their effects properly, and your opponent will be down to 2,000 life points. From there, if they have a monster with 2,000 or more attack, Raffion can burn them out for the rest, or if your life points are 4,000 or less, you can lead with Halion to set their life points to 4,000, have it with Michion, and then burn out the rest with Sandion. That is, of course, a pretty moot point, because this is another scenario in which you can Gustav for game during your main phase 2, using only Michion and Sandion's effect, so you'll only need the extra damage if your opponent ended up increasing their life points somehow. Now, this combo is pretty rough to start up, relying on 3 turns of evolving a single continuous trap without your opponent having enough answers to deal with it. But once you pull it off, your opponent will have no one to blame but themselves, because you gave them plenty of time. Okay, quick aside here, I'm not really going to have any other time to talk about these, and it's very character specific, so let's talk about Zone. The card. It's a normal spell that doesn't have any activated effects, but when this set card is destroyed and sent to the grave, you can select a continuous spell or field spell card in your grave and add it to your hand. I've seen tips saying this works really well in Unchained decks to get some cards back, and I can't really argue with that, but in general, you're going to be relying on your opponent to trigger this card for you. What I find really funny is that they gave Barricade Borg Blocker a similar effect, begging the question of if this generic Link 2 had inherited the power of Iliaster. And with the way it was used, I wouldn't be surprised. But the main card you want to be using this with is Soul Binding Gate, a field spell that can only be activated if you control no monsters, and any number of set spells and trap cards you control were destroyed by a card effect this turn. So you can see the two synergize, even if it's a little forced. During your main phase, if exactly one monster with less attack than your life points is summoned and you have Zone in your grave, you destroy that monster, and if you do, take 800 points of damage, then inflict 800 damage to your opponent. This effect is not once per turn, by the way, so the more you can summon, the more you can burn your opponent for. And it's also a great way to keep them off your monster strategy as long as your life points are stocked up. So it's not only a soul binding gate, but a soul crushing one as well. Alright, so that's all the Time Lord cards, but what do we do with them? Well, OTKing isn't really in the cards for us. We can if we have the right setup, but we need to play as if we're going in for the long haul when that combo doesn't fall through, and we definitely need to plan for going second, since we aren't going to be getting much value out of our Time Lords going first. So we'll play the control game as best we can, identifying which Time Lord fits which situation best, then we keep pressing our advantage until the last grain of sand drops from their hourglass. So what can we play to help them out? Well, as much as everyone hates floodgates, they haven't been banned yet, so we're gonna milk them for all they're worth. We rarely do a lot of summoning on our turns, so summon limit fits us perfectly. And if you want to be a little spicy and only use a single monster per turn, overlapping Rivalry of Warlords and There Can Be Only One is a fantastic way to jerry-rig your own Kaiser Coliseum. And if you want to keep those continuous trap cards safe, Imperial Custom gets the job done. One of the ways we can OTK is with a little card called Celestial Transformation. While we can't special summon our Time Lords from the deck, we can certainly do so from the hand, and none of this card's drawbacks matter at all. We already have 0 attack, mostly, and they're already protected from effect destruction. This can potentially get Michion and Sandion onto the field at the same time without putting you under any kind of summoning restriction, allowing you to finish the game with a giant train. It wouldn't be a video where I talk about gigantic anime cards if I didn't bring up Mound of the Bound Creator. While we won't often be proccing the burn effect, the protections are integral, because for all the things Time Lords aren't affected by, targeting is one of them. But with this, we can keep our monsters safe from compulses, infinite impermanences, and other wild and wacky removal options. Since we're going second deck, we'll want to play as many board wipes as possible to take away cards our opponent has committed to the board. Harpy's Feather Duster is a given, and some Raigekis can clear away problem monsters, but don't be afraid to play our good friend, Torrential Tribute. Once again, our Time Lords are safe from effect destruction, even our own, so whether we trigger it ourselves, or we pull that trigger on our opponent's turn to wipe away their setup, we'll be in a position to take the game. As for a silly tech pick, and I'm really leaning into the silliness for this one, try Time Wizard of Tomorrow, summoned by way of instant fusion. We're looking for board wipes, and this is certainly another one we can use. The monster destruction is guaranteed, the only variable is who takes the damage. And while 50% of the time it'll be you, Sadion is here to reset your life points to 4,000 if they get too low. And the upside is that you might just ping your opponent for enough damage to not need a huge setup to take the game.
And for the editor's silly tech pick, all-out attacks is a great way to allow your deck to go first. Whenever your opponent special summons a monster, they will be forced to attack with that monster into your beefy boys, triggering their effects. While the opponent may be able to set up disruption beforehand, you'll have the solemn out to all of their answers.
And that's all I have to say about Time Lords. They're an interesting cadre of monsters with a variety of toolbox effects, and their eclectic playstyle is matched only by how hard they are to interact with. Play smart and maneuver around your opponent's plans, and you'll be able to take the upper hand and clean their clock. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Time Lords the Doctor Who's Who of powerful fairies, or are they still in need of a time trial run? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander, Ashling Waltz, Nebula Navigators, 3rd Dynasty, Ava Gule, Adams Agidel, Avi Chali, Cryptic Gamer, Eric, Frankie, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Howling Zangetsu, Inblink, Ironic, John Manji, Julius Sneezer, Larakia, Meteornus, Mighty Action X, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Ruxith Sarani, The Fresh Prince of Con-Air, The Wizard Moose, True Neutral, Tyler Cranston and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders, Bear Sharktopus Studios, Chaz Ghost, Corbinisms, Cozy Boat 275, Harry, the Ominous Benefactor, Jesus Garcia, Manga Pages, Marion James E. Picata, Nitromo, RGS, Rem T. Bright, Shooting Star 3300, Star-Lord 777, and the Legendary Raven, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. I'm only able to continue doing this thanks to the support of these lovely people, so if you'd like to be a part of these credits, as well as help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, please check out my YouTube membership or Patreon links in the description to see if I have anything you'd like on offer. And if you want to see another video about giant build-around monsters, check out this video I did covering Sacred Beasts. And if you want to see two Yu-Gi tubers going at it, check out Noah Jenk and I's latest series, Progression Polls, where your voice shapes the format. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.